and Brian Baker, obviously, of Bad Religion, and their co-author, Jim Rulin, the author of the book Do What You Want, The Story of Bad Religion, which they wrote together. It comes out August 18th. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Hey, great to be here.
It's fun. It's fun.
I didn't even see Jim there until you said Jim's with us. So, hey, what's up, Jim? He's not talking. Davey, it's great to see you as well.
It is so good to see you, gentlemen. Greg, Brian, Jim, pleasure to meet you. I got to say, I didn't know the book was coming out. I received the book yesterday. I printed it out. I have here. I'm going to hold it up for the listeners.
Yeah, I don't even have a copy. Let me see what it looks like.
Well,
nice.
No, this is, you know.
Alligator clips. I didn't realize we were going primitive on this.
Yeah, you know, well, DIY.
Cool.
DIY. I printed both sides.
I love it.
I am halfway through. I am remiss to say I have not finished it, but I love it. I love it. It is a thrill for me. Everyone get this book. Halfway through, I'm already satisfied, but I have to finish the whole thing because I love it and I must, and I'm inclined to. So gentlemen, welcome to the show and congratulations on the book.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
You guys like go way, Davey, like obviously you guys know each other. Can you, have you guys, like what's your history of you and Bad Religion? Or
My history with Bad Religion is being a fan since I was a preteen. I gotta say, and reading this book is really delightful for me. And, you know, I've been a fan all these years and, I don't know how we met.
Well, I know how I met Davey because he was a big fan who wasn't creepy about it. And he seemed like a nice straight edge gentleman with a good outfit on. And I believe we met, probably 15 years ago. And it just, now we're very like airport. Hey,
I think that's the last time
Brian
saw each other. We were in an airport somewhere in some country, right, Bri?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't have his phone number, but I do now.
Yes.
But you know, it's that mutual appreciation.
Yes.
Yeah, I too ran into you at Burbank Airport, and you know, that's the place you always run into someone you know, and that day it was Davey. Yeah. But mostly it's backstage at festivals, mm-hmm. and you know, obviously we have mutual friends, so you know, I probably may have even been in the studio at some time. I don't know, but
it's very possible.
People don't realize that the pool of people that we in our guild, especially singers, you know, I will say, they're just like guitar players have a guild, secret handshakes and stuff. Singers, you know, we have our own thing, and we're very, very aware of one another, and we give each other the proper distance that we know we need. And you know, a lot of other musicians don't understand it, but Davey and I have had that respect for a long time.
It's true.
So, Davey, I'm going to let you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just going to say is that guitar players also have learned to respect the singer's space. It's something that bonds us together as we go about our own way, you know,
gentlemen,
slaying our demons as we do.
Both of you are always welcome to my space. And again, I thank you for allowing me into your space.
Thanks.
Well, Davey, I'm going to let you, since, you know, you're so good at approaching the band in a non-creepy way, I'm going to let you ask the first question about, you know, your impressions of the book, you know.
Well, as I said, I love the book, but my first question is a very rudimentary question, which was, what was the inception and inspiration for this book? How did it come about? When did you start talking about it?
Well, you want me to handle that? I mean, Jim is the writer. He's here. Mm-hmm. He was very close to the inception and the very earliest nuggets of ideas. Mm-hmm. Jim was there from the beginning, but I definitely recognized a big vacuous hole in the history of punk. You know, and there was a whole slew of documentaries, as you're probably aware of, and a whole slew of books that came out, but they all seemed to stop around 1992. And it's almost like, you know, the first wave of punk died in 1982. And then, you know, there was not a lot going on. And then 1992 and Nirvana happened. And that was sort of the standard story of punk. And it never sat well with me because I knew it was inaccurate. then again, the people who wrote those narratives and those chronologies, they didn't have a lot of information. So, I mean, there was a big 10-year gap that they simply overlooked. It just so happened that 10-year gap was the Bad Religion story. And when people started filling in that gap and realizing that there was this album called Suffer, for instance, in 1987, which was squarely in the middle of that 82 to 92 gap, they didn't realize how influential that album was and how it helped, even Nirvana, it helped create that thing that seemed like it came out of nowhere, but it didn't come out of nowhere. There was Bad Religion in between. So that, it sounds like I'm just sort of self-aggrandizing Bad Religion, but that's why we had, Jim. Jim is someone who's I consider a historian and a scholar, and there are other people out there who really know a lot more about punk history than I do, and they confirmed it, that this is a story that needs to be told, and that's sort of one of the motivations of it.
Well, I can attest to that, Greg. You're certainly not self-aggrandizing. I mean, Suffer changed music, and it changed punk rock, and it changed hardcore. It affected so many people. And I was thrilled to see that this book was written for many of the same reasons that you just said, because that piece of history, and not necessarily simply the 90s from my perspective, but your piece of history is egregiously omitted from a lot of the history texts of this book. And what you gentlemen have done with hardcore really stood apart from what was going on in hardcore at all, if I may use the term hardcore. Okay, thank you. And it made such an impact on the music and on the scene in such a unique way that has lived on and influenced so many bands forever. And personally speaking, in reading this book, I was flashing back to being a kid and coming to visit LA in the late 80s and listening to my Suffer cassette on my Sony Walkman, being driven around by my family's friends in the back of the car on Sunset and fantasizing about you guys and your lives and Okie Dog and being here.
Okie Dog.
And I mean, of course, I know Okie Dog predated that, but I know you were there. And it's really an important book, and it's an important history, and you gentlemen are so important, throughout the course. And Brian, although I'm speaking momentarily of the time that you were not in Bad Religion at the time, just to be clear, Brian Baker. Sorry, Brian. Brian Baker.
Thank you.
You're a vegan. What do you say? You're a vegan.
Actually, 1 degree of Brian Baker or 5 degrees of Brian Baker is pretty much a real thing, with the amount of accolades you have of, of course, Minor Threat, Dag Nasty, Bad Religion, the Meat Men. I mean, I could go on forever, right, Brian?
There's tons, but I think you hit the big three.
So, Sam Hain, right? Anyways.
Yeah, but there was so little time served in Sam Hain. I don't think it makes the list. But
okay,
again, I'm glad that you're so familiar.
I'm a fan, Brian.
I wouldn't say that to Glenn, but I wasn't. I didn't spend a lot of time in that camp.
Well, there's one thing that I enjoyed about the book, because I am from the San Fernando Valley. I'm from Tarzana and Reseda. I went to Taft High.
Yeah.
My mom taught at Hale Junior High. So
what's your last name?
Parker.
Mrs. Parker? Was it Mrs. Parker?
She probably was no longer teaching there by the time you went there. But I actually, for some reason, kind of forgot about how the Bad Religion roots are so in the West Valley, which is where I grew up, Tarzana, Reseda. I went to high school in Woodland Hills. And I thought the beginning of the book was very interesting about, I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about a Valley Hollywood divide, but also a divide that was coming in around 1980 about what was considered the quote unquote original LA punks, and then the new guard that was starting to come in as that scene was changing. And you were kind of all on the cusp of that.
Well, I mean, you're not aware of those things. You need an outside historian to really put it in perspective. As a kid, I was 15 years old in 1980 and started Bad Religion, having no awareness of how exactly it fit into the earlier wave of punk in LA, or how it would go on to be relevant. We didn't really think like that. I have to say that our awareness was completely determined by what we listened to on the radio on the Saturday and Sunday nights with Rodney Bingenheimer. And so Rodney played what was happening, his word, not mine. He used to say, "This is happening." And,
happening.
and you know, we basically said, man, you know, there's this scene going on in Hollywood, but we're way out here in the West Valley. It's like, I don't see any of these bands, you know, so we got to somehow get to those shows. Well, I was 15, didn't even have my license yet. So I relied on Jay. Jay was 16. Brett was 17. Brett had the wheels, you know. Jay got wheels when he was 17, I think. But we made it a point then to drive into Hollywood as much as humanly possible, just so we could be where it's happening. But by that time, you know, when bands started, X was kind of like a big deal because they were part of that first wave. But the Weirdos were on the wane. You know, there were not a lot of Weirdos shows. There were some, but the overlap was very confusing to me. It's like, why couldn't we see the Germs? You know, well, by whatever 80, I guess it was late 80 or early 81. Darby killed himself. And I remember my first show was at the Fleetwood, actually before I knew Jay or Brett. And I went with these other two guys in my high school. And they were passing out flyers at that show for a Germs show, but we never made it to that show, you know. And later that year, Darby killed himself. So there was this sort of end to the first wave, and X somehow survived through it. But, you know, they were quickly being eclipsed by, and I don't mean eclipsed in the sense that they weren't relevant. They were highly respected. But I'll tell you this much, they wouldn't give Bad Religion the time of day. You know, I'll tell you that much. I mean, we were just kids from the valley. And we were not to be taken seriously. And that's absolutely true, which is fine. You know, we looked up to them so much that they could have asked us to carry their gear and we would have done it happily.
Well, I love the story in the book, though, since you mentioned the Germs. Like, only in LA would this happen. Tell me about the USC frat party that you guys played at with the Circle Jerks, like very early on. I think you were teenagers, because only in LA this is a true classic LA story.
Well, yeah, by that time, we had put out an EP, and we had 6 songs that Rodney Bingenheimer was playing. He played one of them. He actually played one of them when it was just a cassette tape. So we didn't even have any pressed vinyl yet. But I have no idea how we heard about this. Probably Greg Hetson, who was in the Circle Jerks at the time. And we were pals and hung out. And he probably said, hey, you know, the Circle Jerks just got hired to play a frat party. And I'm like, you know, whatever.
At USC, right?
Yeah, it was USC. And I said, you know, if the Circle Jerks are going to play it, I'll play it. But I wasn't that excited about playing for a fraternity, you know. Yeah, so I think they were doing that kind of thing, you know. The fraternities were hiring bands that they could get.
As the tale goes in the book, Greg, the frat was, which explained things. If you read Keith's book, he talks about this party, and I was nonplussed when I hit it, just the way you were when you were asked to play it. But in Keith Morris's book, he doesn't mention what is mentioned in your book, that the frat party was punk themed.
Now we're talking.
And they hired. Of course, I'm just quoting your own book here. And apparently, they hired you guys to play, or asked you guys to play. They wanted real punk bands, and as the book tells, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, the frat boys dressed up as punks.
Oh my God.
And then you guys were punks. Jim, is that, as you recall, the interview?
That's the story that Keith told me.
Oh, okay.
Must be true. But then like Darby but then like Darby Crash and Pat Smear were actually there.
Across the street. Darby and Pat were across the street getting free beer.
I know That's the kind of thing, you know, I do remember there were a bunch of, that's where there was a beer bong, and Peter, our drummer at the time, actually Peter was our roadie at that time because Jay Ziskrat was still in the band, but that was the first place I'd ever seen a beer bong, and Peter downed about 64 ounces of beer within, you know, one shot.
Whoa. What was that before or after he played?
No, he was our roadie at the time.
Oh, he was a roadie at the time.
Yeah.
He wasn't in the band at the time.
But
Brian,
anyway,
Brian, were you spending a lot of time in LA back then? What was your first interaction with these gentlemen? It had to be prior to actually joining the band, right?
It was, but I didn't see Bad Religion live at all. By first time I saw Bad Religion play, I think I had already joined the band.
I think so.
But Brett was still playing.
That's true.
If I'm not mistaken.
What year was that,
but
Brian?
This was 1994.
Wow.
So I had never, my Bad Religion experience was pretty limited. I bought How Could Hell Be Any Worse when it came out. And I bought that and Jealous Again the same day.
Yeah.
And I preferred the aggression of Jealous Again, but I liked the singing and melody better on the Bad Religion record. And that was, you know, it's just kind of funny how that worked because, you know, I mean, I still have the copy.
Were you doing, what year was that? Did Dag Nasty exist yet?
No, this was Minor Threat still. I was with Minor Threat then. When did that record come out? 82? Greg?
Yeah.
82.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's when that was happening. And so I only got to, my LA experiences, early on, I went out there on tour a few times with Minor Threat, but I never really crossed paths with Bad Religion people at all. The first interaction I had with a member of Bad Religion, well, it had to be Hetzer. Everybody was friends with Hetzer. But, you know, knowing him
Greg
from
was
Circle
the real
Jerks.
scene stir. I mean, Greg actually, Hetson lived in Hollywood, so that was cool.
He was wasn't he an original member of Red Cross too? He was in a lot of bands, I think.
Yeah, that's when he lived in the South Bay. But.
Okay.
So it had to have been Hetson, and then I met Brett because Epitaph put out a.
Hey, can you believe that? I'm getting a phone
costume.
call. Hold on a second.
Hey.
This is embarrassing.
I'll just talk while you're doing that.
Sorry
Yeah,
about
go
that.
on.
Do you have a mute button?
This is the new reality. Later.
Brett, Epitaph put out a posthumous Minor Threat record. I'm sorry, a posthumous Dag Nasty record.
Oh, you just blew my mind.
Yeah,
Hold
I
on.
haven't heard of that.
Yeah.
What?
What, you haven't heard it yet?
I gotta go.
No, the Dag Nasty record isn't that great, but we did put it out on Epitaph, and that's when I first met Brett. So this is in 1991. So again, I'm having like peripheral meetings, and if I'm not mistaken, Jay worked at Epitaph at that time. So I probably saw him while he was driving a forklift or doing something Bentley-like, you know, organizing something or stacking something very high.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I can testify that I went to shows every night. I mean, every weeknight that I could, and every weekend in high school, and never saw Minor Threat. I don't know. You know, I have a complicated life because I used to have to go back to Wisconsin for the summer times. I lived in Wisconsin.
It's no problem, Greg.
And simultaneously, I spent my summers in Wisconsin, and you know, my school years in Los Angeles, even while the band was going. And Minor Threat came on tour, I believe, when I was not there. I think you guys came in the summer once during my early years, and never saw a Minor Threat.
Brutal.
Well, you know what's interesting is I was just, this is you want this. This is the icing. I found a flyer online that showed Bad Religion playing a show with Minor Threat at the Roller Works, and I got so excited that I had found evidence that we had shared the stage, and I took it to Jay, and he told me that was not a real flyer, that was a fake flyer, and that did not happen. And Circle One was on the bill, and I was so ecstatic, but you know, like many things in punk, it let me down.
Brian, I saw the internet showed me a photo of you. You look like you were about 10 years old sitting on your amplifier the other day playing a show. I wish I didn't know you were coming into my life today, but I would have taken a screen to show you. But you were playing with Minor Threat. It said you were playing at it feels like you were playing at a high school or
an elementary school.
Okay, yeah, that my brain let me reconcile
yes.
that. I was like, I'm pretty sure it said elementary school. You remember?
We played in elementary school, and I am, my brain is mush, and I don't remember shit. But I think I've been prompted that this was some sort of deal with, we were playing this elementary school because Don Zantara's daughter went there, and we were just like doing a favor for Don.
Whoa.
But you're going to have to call Ian because he knows all this stuff and I don't. But it was not a normal Minor Threat show.
That is baffling.
Unless,
Well, I'm curious,
the 8 and under.
The 8 and under. Well, I'm curious when you eventually did join Bad Religion in '94. Like, it's a famous story. It's in the book. But what exactly happened where you had a chance to join REM instead? You played in a lot of bands and you're an in-demand guy, so you had these kind of offers sort of at the same time, and you chose Bad Religion. Good decision. But I'm curious.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it was easy. I worked at a rehearsal studio, and REM had booked. Sorry. See, this is the mush part. Here's how it happened. I worked at the rehearsal studio, and Juliana Hatfield was doing pre-production for a record there, and she was being produced by Scott Litt. And I worked there, but I also, I was still kind of me, so it wasn't weird that they were like, hey, you want to come in and play? Or, I was kind of like a life coach. I don't really know how to explain it. I mean, Juliana has a better take on it, but like I would just sort of be like, help someone get a good guitar sound, or just be friendly. Who wants coffee? Whatever I did, it made an impression on Scott Litt. And when REM were gearing up for the Monster Tour, they needed a utility infielder, a fifth guy on stage. And I know that Michael and Peter were good friends with Ian MacKaye, and I had made a good impression on Scott Litt. And I think that's probably how it came where I got the opportunity to try out. Because I'm not sure who called me. I don't remember who called me to come, but I did. I conquered after I saw it, just to keep things in line. And the agreement was that I was going to start this, we're going to start rehearsal in Athens in like a couple of months for this tour. And probably 48 hours later, after I had accepted the gig, I got a call. I believe it was a conference call with Greg Graffin and Greg Hetson at the same time. Is that correct, Greg?
Yeah, I remember that. Greg said, yeah, I have this guitar player. And of course I knew of you, but didn't know you. And I believe that was the famous call where I just said one thing, which is, everybody seems to like you. You seem like you're great for this band. But do you know how to sing background vocals? And he said,
absolutely. I sing like a bird.
He said, are you kidding me? I can sing anything. I'm the best background vocal singer. I'm the greatest.
And I have to say that you can see where this is going.
Yeah.
If you've seen the band, you know where it went. But I have to say that Greg was so gracious, because when I after I had accepted, whatever, I'm getting ahead of myself. But when I first went to go sing with Greg, his response to me was, well, you have the gene, so you have a genetic propensity to background success. I think we just have to work this out a little more. And 20 years later, I learned how to sing some of the songs.
See, you can't fuck with science. You just can't.
Yeah, I could recognize he just needed practice. So the good news is, yeah, you can sing because you have the ability. But we spent about 3 weeks just going over all the songs and the background singing parts, because his first show, as you probably know from the book, was in front of 35,000 people. Bad Religion had a festival. I think we were either headlining or co-headlining a festival And that was Brian's first introduction to the shows.
No problem.
Yeah, it was the Bizarre Festival. It was in Germany, and it was only my first. It was my first trip to Germany. My first show with Bad Religion. The airline lost my guitar, and Brett Gurewitz was at the sound desk watching. No pressure.
Well,
But I don't know if this is in the book or not. You guys, sorry. Sometimes when you create the material, you don't actually read it. But
oh, yeah.
I actually did read the book. I want to say on this particular story, I don't remember if it made it into the book. My favorite part of the story is that was the very same year, probably within 6 months, REM had a #1 hit. And that was the song Losing My Religion,
Whoa.
which Brian happily changed to That's Me in the Corner, Choosing Bad Religion.
Well done, Brian. Well done, Brian.
So we sang that. I enjoyed hearing that song on the radio a lot because I changed the lyrics thanks to Brian.
Great work, gentlemen. Jim, speaking of the book, I would like to know a little bit about Jim and your relationship with the band and how you got involved.
Well, I had just come off writing a book with Keith Morris.
Great book.
Doing his book, My Damage, which you referenced. So there was a lot of overlap with the early punk Southern California story. And because it had just come out, there was a lot of awareness about the book. And so people were saying, yeah, well, you guys should talk to Jim. And we did.
Great. Yeah, I respected Jim's writing. I read the book and he had good recommendations. His letters of rec were excellent. and I know that it's really hard to compile a lot of information. And doing that book with Keith, here's a guy who has a history that's longer than Bad Religion in some ways, and Jim was able to really craft that narrative to a concise and linear story. And I thought he's probably the best guy to do this for Bad Religion. But from day one, I told Jim, I do not envy your Herculean task that's ahead of you, because instead of just one guy to work with, he had to work with 7 or 8 different narratives that go back 30 and 40 years now. So
Jim, I was impressed. Knowing how, the span of your band and the history that you must have to be able to compile it in a concise way that seems to really cover what had happened. That's really impressive. If I may harken back to the backing vocals that you were talking about, I'm not going directly. So Brian,
look, I wasn't good. I know it.
Brian, you have my full support and love.
Real good.
That is traumatic. I have to sing those all the time, and I'm the singer, and it's tough. It's tough. But a different backing vocalist I'd like to ask about really quickly. I didn't know about Jeanette being involved in your life, Greg. I think more so.
From Concrete Blonde?
Yeah, and it thrilled me because as I was listening to Bad Religion, I was also very, very much listening to the Bloodletting record. Greg, did you guys sing together? Did you two sing together when she did those vocals?
I believe so. I mean,
that's cool.
We had a long friendship, Yeah. Jeanette, Jeanette's been to the hellhole. That was
wow.
That was our rehearsal studio. It was my mom's garage, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jeanette used to hang out with us a little bit because her boyfriend produced the first Bad Religion LP. His name's Jim Mankey. Mm-hmm. I believe he's in the book, but if he's not, he should be, because Jim Mankey was extremely important to Bad Religion. Jim is a member of the band Sparks, mm-hmm. which has a long history. And Jim was just a very creative and talented producer. And God damn it, we didn't give him any credit on the album except for thanks to Jim.
Oh, is he not credited as producer? That I was wondering when I read that fact in the book. I was baffled because I hadn't realized
he deserves the production credit for that album.
Wow.
And he worked with me and Brett on, because we were the songwriters, but I wrote a lot of my songs on piano.
Mm-hmm.
And on that album is the first place you'll hear punk piano.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one who, and he heard it and said, "Yeah, go ahead, play your piano part on there." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
I didn't think we could do that and get away with calling it a punk album.
Speaking of such things as your melody, the piano, the acoustic guitar, at a time when you guys began, where you're already getting heat from the first wave punk rockers, such as X, as you said, obviously not them specifically, but the first wave of the LA punk. Then you're playing hardcore. So the first wave is mad at you for playing hardcore, but you're playing hardcore and you're putting in acoustic guitar and piano and melodies and harmonies that just weren't there. Were you also receiving criticism from the hardcore kids?
No. And
Okay.
here's why, because there was this band called the Adolescents.
That's all I was I was like, okay, well, there were the Adolescents.
Yeah. Well, let's explain how they explain.
Yeah. So, I mean, in, the Orange County kind of influence, it's so bizarre because they should have been, more warmly attracted to Bad Religion. And I wouldn't say they weren't. By the way, the Adolescents were good friends of ours. TSOL Jay was a good friend of theirs, but they weren't friends of mine. I think they just thought of me as some nerd from the West Valley. But that's cool. I didn't surf. I didn't skate. But I was always friends with Tony from the Adolescents and the other guys too. And our bands were kind of like, we got a lot of the same, they would invite us to play gigs. And our first show, of course, was in Orange County. So, I think there should have been more camaraderie between the San Fernando Valley and Orange County because we were both outliers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah,
but it was almost like we were both competing for the same resource, which was attention from Hollywood. And because of that, there was this competitive exclusion, I think, that was going on. And, it took a while for the Orange County, unless we were playing in Orange County, then we were pretty warmly received. But if it was a Hollywood show, Bad Religion was still very low status. Whereas I think the Adolescents and probably Social Distortion, the I remember playing an early show with Mike and
I was going to ask about that, if that was the Orange County gig, the gig that you did with Social D when you were.
Well, that was the very first one, and at that time they were just happy to have some other band playing with them at this warehouse. But when push came to shove and we got a legitimate gig at the Whiskey on the Sunset Strip, Bad Religion was second billed, even though it was arguably equal. We had just as many fans, but I think it's because, again, somehow Orange County didn't show that camaraderie with the Valley.
I can attest that was true.
They took precedent, and the Starwood, of course, was an important club, and almost any night there you could see an Orange County band. So what was happening was, I think that the outlier communities, the suburbs, were starting to grow in importance. Mm-hmm. And X and the early Hollywood bands didn't have as much dominion over them. They didn't have the traction. They weren't from there. And I think they just sort of, their audience sort of moved on or got older or whatever. But the young kids out in those communities, surfers, skaters, and in my case, just sort of outcasts, were taking over the venues a little bit.
Well, we're almost out of time, unfortunately, because there's so much to discuss. But of course, we can all learn about it from the book that comes out August 18th, which you guys wrote together with Jim, which is Do What You Want, the story of Bad Religion. But before I let you guys go, just in general, I've asked this of X and Red Cross and some of the other bands from that era that I've interviewed. When people think punk, they usually think the UK first, and then they think maybe New York second. But LA punk tends to get short shrift historically. And I think a lot of the books, like the Keith Morris book and like the two books that the two anthologies that John Doe has done, have helped change that a bit. And I think this book will definitely help change that. But what are your like final thoughts on the fact that the LA punk scene never seems to get the same kind of attention that the others do.
Well, I'm biased, so
Well,
I think we'll turn it over to Brian because he's actually someone from the East Coast at the time when this transition was happening.
Well, honestly, I don't really see the LA scene getting short shrift, at least in my upbringing, because I am a Circle Jerks Black Flag kid. And to us, these were grown men who were doing incredible, frightening things. UK stuff was, at that time, and I'm talking about my formative years, which would be 80 through 83, the UK stuff didn't really have the same kind of importance to us. We liked records from bands that no longer existed. But LA was very powerful, at least in Washington, D.C. And it's still, you know, I care very much for Bad Religion, but I listened to the Adolescents yesterday, and I didn't have to. Like, I wasn't prepping for an interview, or, you know, I was just kicking back and listening to the Adolescents.
Wow.
And Social Distortion is one of my favorite bands. So I don't know. I guess maybe it's just maybe it's for people who've grown up in LA. Maybe there's that, you know, tendency to feel looked over. But I say no. Be proud. Hold your head high, LA. Awesome.
That's a great way.
There's I'll put a capper on that just says what it really boils down to is how it's treated intellectually, because what you're talking about is history and how we perceive history. And a lot of the reason that England and New York and even Minneapolis was seen as so important is because really good books were written about those scenes. And LA got a little bit of a later start, but thanks to people like Jim, I think that it's going to catch up real quick and people will realize how important Los Angeles was.
Yes. So thank you, Jim Ruland, for your valiant efforts.
Thank you, Jim.
Ooh, there it is. It looks prettier than my copy.
Yes. The book is called Do What You Want, The Story of Bad Religion by Bad Religion with Jim Ruland. It's out August 18th. And this was a real treat. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Everybody, if you want some more great reading material about a very important moment in LA music history, this is the book for you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you.